Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. I was just reflecting before I started, have I ever given a talk at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning before? I'm not sure that I have, but I admire you more than me for coming and actually listening to a talk at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, so thank you. I used to work on these issues in Ireland for many years. In the last couple of years, I've been living out of Ireland in France, working on them more internationally, so it's great to come back and engage on this topic, which is one that is very close to my heart and I know is of great interest to all of you. And I sat in with your kind permission for a little bit yesterday to listen to your discussions, and it was great to hear the rich discussions you were having and the kind of questions you were coming up with, and hopefully we can explore some of the same questions today, because this is clearly a very important topic for all of us, and I think it's great that this event is happening at all, and I must say it's a privilege to be given permission to come and participate in it, so thank you very much. So I have to describe this utopian future called Lowcarbon Ireland, what the country will look like when we achieve all of these goals. And in fact, describing it is the easy bit. Describing how we get there is the harder bit, and I think that's where there are much tougher questions rather than describing what a low-carbon life looks like. But let me just start with a first projection forward. I'll focus more maybe on, let's say, a time frame of 2050 or something like that. But I'm not too worried about it. I'm not predicting a particular date or whatever else. That's not really the important issue. But let me just start with one time period, which is current projections that I got from one of the agencies here on what our energy mix is going to look like in 2030, which is about 13 years away on current trajectory. And the green part is oil, all of which is heavily polluting and is imported from somewhere else. The red part is gas, which is quite polluting and imported from somewhere else, most of it, or a mix at the moment. And the blue is the renewables bit, which is bigger than it is now, but it's still very much a minority. So our starting point is we are very, very dependent on other people's expensive polluting energy. In the time it takes me to give this talk, assuming I stick to time, we will have sent about €250,000 abroad to buy other people's energy. So we're giving money to Scotland to buy their gas, to Russia to buy their gas, to Libya, Saudi Arabia, who knows who else to buy their oil. And we're saying, here, please take our money and spend it in your society to make your lives better. We are giving our money away and it's going abroad. In the context that we, as Mary has said, we have some of the best clean energy resources you could possibly hope for. In our wind, in our solar, in our offshore wind, in our waves. Many of you know, anybody from the West in particular in recent times, there's quite a lot of energy out there in the sea. If we can find ways to capture it and make use of it, it's clean and it's our own. So what does it take to become a leader here? Well, first let me tell you just momentarily about some other countries' ambitions and countries that are near here. In the context of this mix being what we're headed for in 2030, by 2050, Denmark has pledged to be fossil fuel free. They intend to be using no fossil fuels by 2050. By the same date, Germany has pledged to halve the total amount of energy it's using. Even as the economy continues to grow, even as it continues to make cars, create new jobs, make everyone comfortable in their homes, they intend to do that with half the amount of energy they're using today. So to be a leader in this field is going to require quite a different level of ambition, as well as all of the actions that it takes to get there. Now, I'm not going to dwell on transport because I know you'll be talking about that next time, but I just want to remind you that the biggest chunk here, and in fact the biggest chunk in everybody's graph in the future, is oil, because the one sector we're still grappling with is transport. Right now, we haven't made much progress in any country on getting the petrol and diesel out of our cars and our buses and our trains and whatever else, and that's going to be a major focus. So I encourage you to give the presenters a hard time on that topic when they come in front of you in terms of how we move forward on that, but I won't dwell on it too much because I'm going to dwell on our homes. So what does a sustainable house look like? Well, it looks like this. It looks like a perfectly ordinary house that we all live in now. This is a house that was built in Enniscorthy last year as part of an estate of a few dozen houses, and its annual energy bills are €200. And this is what the kitchen looks like, the same as anybody else's kitchen. Living in this home doesn't feel any different, except it's warmer, it's brighter, it's cozier, and it's particularly warm and bright and cozy when the electricity bill arrives in your door and it's about €20 a month or less or whatever else. So All of this is perfectly possible today. As Mary said, we're doing quite well on the new homes we built. If you build a home today and you meet the building regulations, it will use less than a third of the energy of the average Irish home. So we are making real progress there, assuming we are enforcing those building regulations and assuming people are trained with the right skills and things like that. It's moving quite well towards much lower energy homes. And in fact, now it's possible not just to build a home that uses more or less no energy, but actually generates more energy than it uses. So it'd be what they call an energy positive home, because you can have your solar panels and your different technologies that are actually, you're using so little in the home, you're actually able to give away some of the spare energy. And I'll talk a bit more about that. When you build a new home to these standards, it's a little bit more expensive than an ordinary average home, but not that much more, because as you can imagine, when you're building something from scratch, to go that little bit further on more insulation, better windows, better heating system, the incremental costs are quite small. What's much more challenging is to think about converting all the homes that already exist into these kind of homes, which we absolutely have to do. If we want to be low carbon by 2050, then all of our homes have to be low carbon. And 80% of the homes that exist around us today will still be with us in 2050. So there's no getting away from the fact that we have to go back to each and every home and figure out how to make it low carbon, low energy. And the point I want to make to you is sometimes it's expensive, sometimes it's awkward, but it's perfectly possible. There's lots of examples around Ireland that homes that were old and leaky, expensive to heat, always cold and drafty, have been upgraded to super modern homes that use virtually no energy. You can walk around in your bare feet, your bills are minute. This is being done every day in Ireland. It is possible. Now let me talk about some of the ways to do this. So this is just a kind of schematic of a home that I'll just give some examples of the kind of things we need to do if we want to make homes energy-free or carbon-free. And this applies to whether we're building one new or going back and upgrading an old one. So my mantra is energy efficiency first. As we like to say, the cheapest, cleanest unit of energy is the one you don't use. So you should always start with fixing the holes in the leaky bucket before you start thinking about the water you're pouring into the bucket. So you can think about much more modern windows and doors, really good insulation in the walls, in the floors, in the ceiling, all of that kind of thing. And if you do that, you can really dramatically reduce the amount of energy it takes to heat a home in the first place. You can look at technologies like in this case, which is an enclosed fire, an old-fashioned fire that many of us grew up with. The vast bulk of the energy disappears up the chimney, whereas in a modern fire that you can buy now down in your local store, keeps all the heat in and distributes it to the room, and that there might be logs in that fire, or there might be wood chip or whatever, and a lot of us have converted to those kind of technologies already. And Mary mentioned heat pumps, which are very good at extracting lots of small amounts of energy from the ground or the air, concentrating it up and pumping it into the house. They're still a little bit more expensive, but they are becoming much more common and much more attractive. In this house then, this house has solar heating, so that this is blackened pipes that you pour water through and it heats them up, and you put that into your water tank so that the boiler has to do a lot less work. You can get a grant for this, and lots of people have installed these around the country. This house also has solar panels which generate electricity, and as Mary said, in many countries you can either use that electricity or sell it back to the system. Right now in Ireland you can't. You can use the electricity, but you don't get any price if you want to sell it back. Think about in the future that you won't even see these solar panels, because there's clever people out there today inventing roof tiles that are actually solar panels as well as roof tiles, or walls or windows that are actually invisible solar panels as well. So by 2050, none of this stuff will be on the roof. You can imagine that all of these roof tiles, the walls, will actually be solar panels as well as roof tiles and walls. You won't even see it. That technology is already coming as we speak. These are some of the ways a house like this can, first of all, reduce its energy and then generate its own energy. But of course, we get a lot of energy from somewhere else. So a lot of us get our heat from the gas system, and of course we all get our electricity from the electricity system. And where is that coming from? Well, first of all, with gas, at the moment, all of our gas is what we call natural gas, which is a fossil fuel. It's not as polluting as oil or coal, but it's still polluting. A lot of us, of course, don't have the privilege of living on the gas system, so we get it from oil or whatever else which we import. There are ways of making that cleaner. You can make such things as biogas, as they call it. So you could imagine a future where we're still on the gas system, but the gas is not so polluting. Or you can imagine a future where we're actually not using gas through our pipelines because we're doing it ourselves through our heat pumps and our efficient solar heaters and things like that. And of course, we get electricity from, at the moment, we get it from coal, we get it from gas, and we get it from wind. They'd be the main sources, a little bit of hydropower, a little bit of a couple of other things. I think we'll still get it from those sources in the future. Maybe the mix will be different. Hopefully the mix will be different. We could think about more offshore wind as well as onshore wind, and we could certainly think about solar. So for solar energy, many countries are making a choice or having a mixture between, you can think about every roof having a small little bit of solar generation through a roof panel, or you can think about a few fields out there with loads of solar panels generating lots of electricity, which they then pipe through the network into our homes. So you have a choice between kind of big systems that feed all of us or small systems that we use ourselves. There are other choices we don't use here in Ireland, like nuclear energy. Where I live in France, most of our electricity comes from nuclear. It's quite a debated point at the moment in terms of what the future of that is. Some countries still look at nuclear, others don't. Germany is phasing it out. Japan is having quite a debate since the earthquake in 2011 brought down a nuclear plant with many tragic consequences, and there's still a debate as to where they will take that future. I do want to pause on wind for a second. Mary has talked a bit about its role in this, and I know this is a hot topic for many people. And without getting distracted by it, let me just make one or 2 points from my perspective. I think that it's a great pity that wind energy has become so controversial in Ireland, and I do think that the wind industry has to accept its share of the blame in terms of how some of these projects were built with very little local consultation and very little benefit to local communities. And I do think many communities are right to complain when people are putting wind turbines in areas where there's been no consultation, where people are concerned about what it does to the view, if they're too close to people's homes. And I think none of that is necessary. There's no reason why, through proper planning, proper consultation, and proper community involvement, we can't put wind farms in the right places under the right circumstances. And remember that there are many people already today living close to wind farms who don't have issues with it, but there are other people who do have concerns, and those concerns need to be taken seriously. On the other hand, the growth of wind farms in Ireland is probably, certainly, the biggest single act we have taken to reduce carbon emissions from our energy system. Right now, the amount of carbon dioxide we emit from our electricity generation is 20% lower than it would be without the wind sector. And that's equivalent to about 3 million tonnes of carbon dioxide every year that we're not emitting because we make use of wind energy. And equally, it's equivalent to about a couple of €100 million of energy that we don't have to import every year, and that's money we don't have to spend on other people's fossil fuels. So nationally, wind is doing good things for us. And locally, it's become an issue of contention that we really need to address, and we need to find a way to get the right balance between local concerns and national benefits, because we have a great resource, and in my view, it would be a great pity if we didn't make use of it. Now, Mary touched on this, but the home of the future is a luxurious place to be. It's going to be bright, it's going to be warm, it's going to be cozy, and your bills are going to be minute, if not absolutely zero. But it's also going to be connected to your iPad and your smartphone, and it's going to have lots of kind of fancy, lovely technology that you don't have today. So there are already systems today available. You can buy them here in Ireland right now, where you put a little Wi-Fi thing on every radiator in your house and one on your boiler. You connect it all up to your phone, and you can program that every single room has a different temperature at different times. So you can set the living room to be warm at 7:30 in the evening and switch off at 10:30. And then you can set the baby's room to be a couple of degrees warmer during the morning. You can set child A's room for the heat to come on at 7:30 because they get up early. The teenager next door doesn't need heat till about noon, so you can change the setting for that one. You can press a big button called movie night because you've decided to stay in tonight, so you want the living room to be a bit cozier, maybe bring the lights down a little bit, slightly a romantic mood or whatever else. All of this is perfectly possible today and will become much more common. You can buy a car now that has a little device in it that when you're driving home from work, it tells your home you're 15 minutes away. It judges the traffic, it knows where you are, and so the heat turns on a little bit gently. And then when you get closer, it turns it up a little more. When you pull into the driveway, the lights go on. All of this technology is out there. So the home of the future is high-tech, is convenient, is comfortable, is fun to play with. All of this done in very low cost and low carbon terms. Now, some of the technologies I've mentioned to you there are being made today by Irish firms. So a real important dimension here is we can create a low carbon future for ourselves that is all about creating local jobs. And one of the reasons we can do that is because we're starting from this position of import dependence. So every time we do something that reduces our use of fossil fuels, not only do we get the environmental benefit, but we find ways to keep that money at home instead of sending it abroad. So instead of spending money every year for oil in your oil tank, you spend some of that money on local jobs to upgrade your house, or you spend some of that money on the kind of technologies I described that are being invented by Irish firms. So there's a real gain for Ireland being a real importer of energy to move money and jobs much more locally. And equally, those technologies can be sold abroad. You can imagine that if an Irish firm has a device that can really lower the energy use in an office or a factory, you're going to find customers for all over the world for that. There's a real opportunity for us to exploit our skills in IT and technology and all that to become a world leader here. Exploiting our own resources and enhancing our own reputation. So it's getting harder and harder every day to mark yourself out as a world leader here because other countries are moving so far ahead. So we're going to have to get the skates on if we really want to get this reputation for being an early adopter, for being a world leader in this sector. Another gain we get is to become more resilient. More resilient, I don't know if that's the best word to use, but basically we can take the rough and tumbles a little bit more. As we heard yesterday about some of the scary stuff about more storms, more flooding, more rain. So the kind of home that I described to you with better insulation, more self-sufficient, is much better at being ready for that future, where it doesn't matter if the power lines come down because we're actually not using the power lines, or it doesn't matter if it's a really cold and windy day because the home is so warm and cozy, we're ready for that. And of course that applies for society as a whole. As fossil fuels if they become more expensive, if they become more scarce, if they become more socially unacceptable, the less dependence we have on them, the more ready we are for that kind of future. So I just want to talk a little bit now before I finish about kind of some of the ways of getting there. Excuse me. There's a real fear, I think, that works sometimes, and I think it came up in yesterday's discussion, that there's so much to be done to get from where we are now to where we need to be that it can feel really overwhelming and feel really kind of scary. How on earth do we take all those actions? I focused on the home sector. I didn't even talk about transport or industry or the public sector or schools or hospitals. But even in homes, think about all the actions that have to be taken. You have to develop those technologies. There has to be grants. There has to be information. There has to be regulation. It cuts across about 10 government departments, from the Department of Housing, Department of Environment, Department of Transport, because we're going to have to think about how we build our cities and how we live closer to work so our journeys aren't so long. It can feel a little bit overwhelming, I think, to all of us when we start to think about what we need to do. And for that reason, I think it's better not to always think about the end of the journey, but the start of the journey. And if it were up to me, I would suggest we pick a few topics and really go for them. And I think one that I think is quite interesting is electric vehicles. Why don't we just really move on that in Ireland? Why don't we just really move on making all our public buildings, schools, hospitals, social welfare offices, all of those things, super low energy, super low carbon? Just pick a few topics like that, really get on with them, get an international reputation for them, but also show it can be done. And I think all of us would find it easier to move on to the next thing if we pick some things and said, let's really be the top of the heap on this. Let's really be a front runner and really get them done. And I think there's real merit in kind of almost blocking out some of the scariness of all the things we have to do and just pick a few and focus on it and get on with them. In terms of our role as individuals and things like that, so we all make choices every day in terms of whether we hop in the car, when we turn on the lights, or, how hot we make the house, that all clearly affect climate change and all clearly affect our environmental impact. But I really, really hate this kind of stuff about I feel guilty because my house was warm, or I feel guilty because I took the car to the shops or something like this. We shouldn't live in a society where it feels bad to do nice, comfortable, pleasant things. And equally, we shouldn't live in a society where it takes effort and thought and commitment to be low carbon. And that's the situation we have at the moment. If you kind of kick back and don't think about it, our default normal behaviours tend to be high carbon. They tend to be driving in cars, using fossil fuels in our homes, all those kind of things. And we have to make a mental effort every time we want to be more low carbon. So why don't we flip that it actually becomes quite tough to be high carbon? If we all lived in the kind of homes I described, we'd have to go to quite some effort to waste energy and to emit carbon and things like that, and we wouldn't even have to think about it. It's not about turning the lights off every time because I feel a little bit guilty about the planet. The lights go off automatically, and it's hard work to be polluting. So that's the kind of future we should be thinking about, not demanding of all of us each and every day to make 100 little sacrificing decisions. I think I'll put a jumper on and offer it up, or I think I'll walk to work, sure, it's only raining in a little bit. That's not the kind of environmental future I'm interested in. I want it on my phone, and I want the stuff that turns on and off, and I want it to be comfortable and convenient. So what becomes more interesting then is about our decisions as a society, and I was fascinated to listen to some of the discussion we heard yesterday evening about the role of government versus the role of the individual and things like that, because I think the real impact is the choices we make together, which of course ultimately means the policy choices government makes on our behalf. But government is not some separate entity out there that is at a distance and we say, I wish they'd do what we want. I happen to think that Ireland has one of the most responsive set of politicians in the world, because we can all go up and tell them what we think of them outside Mass on a Sunday, or a few thousand votes makes all the difference. So I think politicians should listen to what people want, and I don't think people are telling politicians, I want you to raise my taxes because I want more grants for clean energy, or I want you to support wind energy in my county because we've got to become cleaner. I don't think we're even telling our politicians, I want you to prioritise climate change. I don't think politicians feel under pressure to deliver on this, and I think we need them to feel under pressure to deliver on this, and that comes from us. A politician doesn't automatically go out there and volunteer to do something controversial or risky or possibly with negative consequences unless they feel this is going to help them get re-elected. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's their job, is to listen to what people want, give it to them, and hopefully get re-elected. That's the nature of the system we're in. So if we genuinely in this room feel, I don't mind if it becomes much more expensive to buy a big polluting SUV, please go ahead and tax it. Or I don't mind if my electricity bill goes up by 10% because we want to give support for people to put solar panels on their roofs. We're going to have to tell our politicians that, because I don't think they think that's what we think at the moment. Finally, I think I can assume, I hope you agree with me, that doing nothing is not an option. So we can't just build nothing nowhere. We can't say we're not going to build any wind energy or solar energy or nuclear energy. We're not going to give grants for upgrading the homes. So assuming we agree that doing nothing is not one of the choices, then the choices is between different things. And everything we can choose has pros and cons. Wind turbines, some people don't like the look of them, some people don't want them on in their neighbourhood, but they produce clean, cheap energy. Solar panels don't have the same impact on the environment that wind energy does, but at the moment they're a little bit more expensive, albeit price coming down. Offshore wind, you can put it far out of sea so you don't see it, but it's more expensive. So we have all these trade-offs between different things, and I think it's important that in talking to our politicians and in asking them to lead us, we don't just say in a very theoretical way, I'm in favour of tackling climate change. We also say, I'm willing to be part of a discussion about what it is we do like and don't like, what we're willing to put up with, which cons are worth the pros and which ones are not. We have to have that kind of debate where we accept that things have to change, money has to be spent, things have to be built, our lives have to change in some kind of way, and it's for us to decide which ways are better and which ways are worse. With all of that, I do want to say to you and leave you with this message, that a low-carbon future is not some distant utopia, because all of the technologies and options I've described to you are all fully available today. Literally, we could do it tomorrow if we wanted to spend some money, quite a lot of money, obviously, go to quite a lot of effort. So I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's not going to take quite some time and quite some complexity, but there are no fundamental barriers to Ireland becoming a leader in this area. Thank you for your time.